participants are joining in, I'll begin introducing. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Green Oak Expert Talk today. I'm Sneha. I'm a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist with the Green Oak Initiative. I've completed my MPhil and PhD from NIMHANS. My PhD was in the area of adults with ADHD. I'm currently working as a psychotherapist at the Green Oak Initiative. Our Green Oak Initiative Clinic is a community mental health clinic. We're based out of Fraser Town, Bangalore. We provide psychiatry, psychological services, which are easily accessible and affordable to the local community. It was founded by Dr. Soumya Krishna, our psychiatrist, Dr. Ashlesha Bagadia, our perinatal psychiatrist, and Ms. Jwala, neuropsychologist. They individually bring in decades of clinical experience, but also believe in collaborative care. I'd like to share that Green Oak Initiative also runs a low-fee clinic, Samartha. We run it every Friday for medicine management, psychotherapy, and we conduct psychological assessments for the community. Our team also runs a free and confidential helpline to provide psychological support for our healthcare workers. Today, we are here for our Green Oaks Expert Talk. This is part of our ongoing monthly talk series. The theme for today is women and leadership. We've spent much of our time encouraging women to shatter the glass ceiling, but what does leadership really look like in the mental health sector with women? For the talk to address the same, we are delighted to present Dr. Prabha Chandra. She's our expert speaker. She's a senior professor of psychiatry and associate dean at NIMHANS Hospital, Bangalore. She's a president-elect of the International Association for Women's Mental Health and co-author of the WPA curriculum on intimate partner and sexual violence, as well as WPA position statements on violence against women and perinatal psychiatry. She's also a co-author of the recent Lancet Commission for Mental Health and Violence Against Women, an active researcher with 17 funded grants as a principal investigator. She's also edited several books on women's mental health and palliative care. Heralded as a champion for women's mental health by the Lancet Psychiatry, she's always strived to mentor and support early career professionals, both men and women, to achieve their best. Her academic interests include research ethics. Also, when she's not solving Wordle and Cordle, Dr. Prabha enjoys teaching Juno, her dog, new tricks and doing speed walks around the Agra Lake. We also have two discussants with us today, Dr. Suhas, who's an assistant professor of psychiatry at NIMHANS under the project run by the Community Psychiatry and Telemedicine that focuses on training. He's completed the MD in psychiatry and postdoctoral fellowship in clinical neurosciences and therapeutics in schizophrenia from NIMHANS. His areas of interest include schizophrenia, neuromodulation, precision medicine, community psychiatry, and leadership in psychiatry. Next, we have Dr. Dharani. She's a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist with a decade of clinical experience. After completing her MPhil in clinical psychology in Manipal University, she's worked as a clinical psychologist at NIMHANS and also completed her PhD in the borderline personality disorder. She's currently working as a senior psychotherapist at the Green Oak Initiative, a community mental health center in Bangalore. As we begin the talk today, I'll quickly also go over a few housekeeping rules. I request everyone during the talk to keep their mic on mute. We have Dr. Prabha Chandra, our expert speaker, begin the session, which would last about 30 to 40 minutes, followed by our two discussants. At the end of about 1 hour, 15 minutes or so, we will open the floor for discussion. At that point, feel free to switch on your video. One can raise hand or use the chat box for any questions or comments. We'll first take the questions that have already come and then open for the other remaining participants. I welcome all the participants today and I hand it over to you, Dr. Prabha.
Good afternoon, everybody, and apologies for the slight wait in the waiting room. Looks like Mohan Isaac's lecture was very popular, and so it kind of stayed on. So, you know, when Ashlesha asked me to speak about women's leadership, I, of course, readily agreed, because anything Ashlesha asks, I have to readily agree. My association with her goes way back, and we've done many good things together, and we'll continue to do all those good things together. So thanks, Ashlesha, for inviting me, and for Green Oak, and to Sneha for that nice introduction. So what I'm going to do today is, talk a little bit about my leadership journey, and then to take you through some slides, which actually some of them were made for a workshop called the RISE workshop, which we did a couple of years ago at the Marseille conference. And I'm hoping to repeat that workshop soon in another conference as well. And also then in the style of leadership of women, which is collaborative, inclusive, Ashlesha and I had a chat and we decided that it can't be just a monologue, and it needs to be something which other people can, be included in. And so my two partners in crime, Dharani and Suhas, are going to be discussants. So they're going to raise some of the issues that I talk about, bring up their own issues. And I thought it was very important to have people from both genders to kind of reflect a little bit on women's leadership, because we live in a world where there are many people and everybody should be thinking about leadership for women. So that's how we're going to take it. This is going to be like a interesting, fun kind of a session. So please feel free to comment, share, questions, of course, but maybe more because I see on the screen many women leaders, where many women who've taken lots of initiatives. So it'll be great to hear, their thoughts and their opinions. A lot of my material has been taken from talks that I've listened to, people I've read, role models that I have seen. So I will be throwing names here and there, the people who I've sort of learned a lot from. So let's start. And because I have slides, I'm going to share those slides. Okay. Can everybody see the slides? Just give me a thumbs up. Yes, great. So as you can see in this picture, I think the whole concept about leadership, be it women or men, should actually be not just about climbing oneself, but about lifting others as you climb. And I think that that's what, to me, is the most important part of leadership. Because being a leader is not about appearing very strong or, about being this most supreme person who everybody listens to, but leadership is about achieving outcomes and achieving results and taking people along as you do that. And I think that has always been a sort of style for women's leadership, and we'll talk about it a little more. So I think the other thing which this picture kind of shows is the inclusivity. If you see the various colors, the various hairstyles, the various outfits, it's women's leadership also needs to be about inclusion of people who are diverse in terms of race, caste, color, sexuality, gender, all of that. So I think that when we are looking at leadership in a very narrow, in a very sort of binary kind of a way, we don't think of leadership like this. But I would like to present this as my vision of leadership, and particularly of women's leadership. I also bring in a lot of my my learnings from my work at the International Association of Women's Mental Health, of which I was the secretary, and now I am president-elect. And this has been a very important journey for me, because I was not one of those people who would ever think that I would ever become the president of an international organization. I'm shy of fighting elections and doing all of that. So I will take you through that journey as well, about how mentors actually challenged me and made me take on some of those roles. Okay, so one of my favorite authors, and many of yours, I'm sure, is Toni Morrison. And she said, if there is a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, you must be the one to write it. And so a lot of my journey has been basically about something like that. Just to give you some idea, growing up in the 60s, for many of you, that seems really ancient, but yes, I we were in families where women tended to be homemakers, and men tended to be the ones who took all the decisions. And I saw around me a very, very strong women. Both my mom had my mom was 6 sisters and 2 brothers. My dad's side was another huge family. We were part of this big extended family. And all the women I saw were very strong. They were poets, they were musicians, they were dancers, they were excellent cooks. They battled bereavements, widowhood, mental illnesses, so many things. But I always found that they were differential to men, and that they would never ever think that they could manage things on their own, because despite the fact that they had all the leadership qualities that were there. And so I always wondered where this strong deference to men came from. Why did not women feel, these women who were around me, feel that they had it in them to, display their strengths, and not to feel that they were in any way less than their male siblings or their male children, depending on their life stage. And so one had to then look outside of that immediate family, because it was understandable. Socialization in the 50s, in the 40s actually meant that you didn't have much say. We know that, including the right to vote has been something much, if you look at the history of humankind, the right to vote is just so recent. So in all those ways, I always found that I did not, though I got people with wonderful qualities, leadership qualities, I did not have absolute role models. So one of the things that I would do even from early childhood was to constantly read about role models of women leaders in their respective fields. And I continue to do that even today, to derive inspiration, to learn from other women leaders. And even, anytime I get somebody whom I admire, I would start talking to them about their style, about what they do, how do they handle negotiation, what is it that makes them tick, just to be able to glean things. And I think this is a very important thing even for the younger women of today, because if you look around you, you still don't have too many role models in high level leadership. And that is what young women should be able to look at. And so it's then, you start rely on other role models. So these are 4 of my, the ones which I picked. There are many, many more, but I just would like to highlight 4 of them. Of course, the notorious RBG, all of us know about her, all of us read about her. Her life was very inspirational to me because she started off very slightly later in her age to do law. She had a baby while she was doing law. She moved from Harvard to Columbia because her husband got a job in New York. And then she rose to such a high position in the US Supreme Court, which was not very easy for somebody like her at a time like hers. But I think her leadership was related to being extremely authentic, not being scared, and believing in the cause that she was fighting for. So we know that she fought for so many causes, and that was her leadership quality. The fact that she was fearless, and she's called notorious because she wouldn't, bat an eyelid before calling a spade, however difficult the situation was. She was also a minority in some ways, and had to meet a lot of challenges. Maria Ressa, for those of you who know her, she's a Nobel Prize winning journalist from the Philippines. She got the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, I think, or maybe last year. She's a journalist, and she has her own news website, and she chooses to write, has been imprisoned several times, but again is a very fearless advocate of what is right and what what is wrong, and again I think is not scared of meeting challenges, and being a woman has never stopped her from speaking her voice. much older, but I think very relevant to all of us, is Dr. Rukhmabai Raut. I have been trying to get the movie which has been made, which apparently is very good, but I have not laid my hands on it. But I have read about her in the book on women doctors. And she was a doctor in Surat. She was a women's health specialist, an obstetrician, and much ahead of her time. She was divorced. She went abroad to do medicine. She came back. She started a whole movement of women's health in central India, and remains quite an icon. And this is a Google image which came up during her birthday. So you can imagine that, you know, she's a real trailblazer for all of us at a time when women were not allowed to do medicine in India. There was a time when women were not even allowed to do medicine in India. There was no college. And finally is Gladys West. So I like Gladys West because my sense of direction is abysmal when I drive. I'm a good driver, but I have problems finding locations. And Gladys West was the one who was the person behind the GPS that we all use in our maps and while we're driving and everything. And she was the one who was the brain behind the mathematician. I don't know how many of you have watched the movie Hidden Figures, and her story is something like the Hidden Figures, where for a long time she was not even known for the work she was doing. But one of the things that she had, and that is one of the qualities of a good leader, is basically you have a sense of purpose and you have passion. I think if you have these two, then they kind of take you forward. So I think while each of these women were in different countries, different contexts, different time zones, different years, I think one of the things that I found that they all had in common was that they had a purpose and they had passion, and they were determined that being a woman was not going to stop them in doing what they wanted to do. So I think the first lesson in leadership, be it for men or women, is to have that P&P, the purpose and passion, and to also sometimes stretch yourself and go out of your comfort zone, because unless you do that, women are going to reach the place they reached. We must remember that all of these women had to, it has not been easy for them. They didn't have godfathers or godmothers. They didn't have people to sort of push them forward, but they diligently worked with some kind of inner drive. And on days that I think that I'm not doing enough, or I face misogyny, or I face opposition, or I look at the world around me or the country around me and think what's going to happen to women who face so much of violence. I look at all these women, I read about them again, I listen to them again, and I think derive some inspiration from them. So I think it's important for us to always have role models, be they in real life or whom we have access to in some way or the other. So I think the whole concept of women's leadership became really important in the time of COVID. And that was because we had all these WhatsApp forwards to all of us saying, these are the women leaders and this is what's happening with COVID-19. Countries where COVID is being managed well are being handled by women. And we know that, New Zealand with Jacinta Ardern, we know Kerala, we know, Germany. So all of these places where there were women leaders, it seemed as if the COVID crisis was being managed well. And I think, and that kind of indicated a style of women's leadership. One important style of women's leadership is crisis management. I think women are so used to handling crisis in their lives, in their families, with themselves, in their health, that they become very good at crisis management, that you keep a cool head, you don't lose it. You think of the immediate things that need to be done. You make a plan and you just go ahead knowing well that this crisis will pass. So I think the one of the styles of leadership of women is that they are very good crisis managers, but that also comes with problems, and I'll talk about it a little later. Thinking of everyone. Again, I think women being more inclusive, being part of families, right from the time that they are socialized, tend to think of everyone, not just the family, but, like all of us women, um, I'm sure men do too, but women do a little more. You think not just of your immediate family, you think of your extended family, you'll think of friends, you'll think of pets, you think of the people, your support staff who help you. There's constantly, the circles are quite large for women in terms of empathy and in terms of, thinking about it. Women tend to be more introspective and reflective. I talked about inclusion and working within resources. Again, this is something that I think comes, very naturally to many women, because many of them have watched their mums being homemakers, managing with small pots of money, and how do you make 1 rupee go to the maximum. So I think these are important leadership qualities which are so relevant in times of crisis. And maybe that is the reason why that at a time like disasters or in a time like COVID-19, women tended to show much more leadership, better leadership, because it was not about posturing. It was not about I need to be this person who did everything. There was no appropriation. It was all about things need to be done. The child needs to be fed, sent to school, homework needs to be finished, the support staff needs to be given their salaries. I need to get along with people. So I think that approach of women probably just helped. And if you look at people like Jacinta Ardern, who is herself a mom, she has a child, you know that she couldn't be doing a prime minister's job if she didn't have all of these qualities. So I think some of these qualities, which I'm sure are there in men as well, but they are more common in women. And so women can probably make very good leaders in times like this. However, the story is not really great, because, the recent the UN Gender Index, Gender Equity Index, which basically is a wonderful, index which looks at all the countries and looks at, how gender advanced each country is based on certain characteristics, which include political representation, which include education, which include income, and a few other parameters. What they have said is that it's going to take 95 years for political equality in women. So none of our lifetimes we can achieve political equality. And it's going to take 270 years for economic equality. So maybe my great granddaughter might be at a time when she can see economic equality, right? So I think, but to me, this is not very dismal, because like I said in the beginning, if you look at the suffragette movement, if you look at voting rights, all of that happened just very recently. So, but I think this just tells you that, women have, like in this picture, you can see that the woman has the heaviest burden to carry when she's going to become a leader. And that's a given, that, when you want to attain leadership, your women need to work doubly hard, carry double loads to get ahead. This was very interesting. And during COVID, I'm bringing in COVID because I think, like I said earlier, that, COVID kind of gave us a glimpse into society in many ways. We learned so many things about ourselves, and we learned so many things about people who are supposed to be, looking after us. And in terms of women academics and the gender inequity, that during COVID, there was a huge boom in, the number of publications that happened because of lockdown. People were working from home. It was easier. But what happened was that there was a great inequality in COVID-19 research authorship. And this BMJ article actually looked at all the COVID publications, and what they found was that women overall had lesser number of research publications and lesser number of related publications, and particularly in the difficult sciences, which are not conventionally women's, areas of expertise, and particularly where there's lots of emphasis on on a lot of work, and these included economics, medicine, and science. So this tells us something, that even if women, there are lockdowns and women work from home, they tend to do so many other things that they are not the ones who necessarily publishing. All of us women here know that when, particularly who are living in families, who have other responsibilities, are fully aware that when there are webinars on Saturday evenings, it's a time that I don't think any of us are able to really do justice without ensuring that everybody else is looked after before we log in, which is probably not the same for men. And that is a challenge that we will constantly have to grapple and work with. Okay, so I'm going to now move on a little bit and talk about certain phenomena which are there. Now, we all know the glass ceiling. There's one ceiling beyond which women are not able to rise. So top management, top leadership, the representation is very low, because you all rise to a point, and beyond that, it's very, very hard. It becomes really narrow till there are very few women on the top. And this was classically called the glass ceiling. But there are two more glasses that have been identified. One, very interestingly, is called the glass escalator effect. Now, if you look at female-dominated professions like nursing, teaching, social work, and any other female-dominated professions, if you have a man and a woman, both in the same profession, and even in female-dominated professions, it has been seen that men rise much faster than women. So it's very ironical that this has been researched again and again, and has been found that there is the glass escalator effect. So even if you have, a profession where there are lots of women, if there are few men, then they seem to rise. They have a sort of advantage of rising, which is very ironical, because women face obstacles if it's a predominantly male-dominated profession. It's not the same for women. So it's interesting that there are some things because of which men rise much faster. Then, of course, we have something called the glass cliff, which is a very important thing that we all need to remember. That just because women are good with crisis, very often, either because of that or just as a very clever strategy, many times when companies or places or institutions are in trouble, either financial trouble or union trouble or other kinds of difficulties or other crises like we saw COVID, women are asked to become the leaders, knowing fully well that they might fail. And this has been seen again and again around the world, that when there are organizations which are in crisis, which are in trouble, which are in difficulties, women are given positions of power. And the attitude is that if they fail, then we can always attribute it to the fact that it was a woman who was the leader. So this is another glass phenomenon which has been noted recently, and we are seeing some examples of that even in our daily lives. Give difficult positions to women, and if they fail, then they get the brunt of it, and it's because that's a woman. So I think we all need to be very aware of it, particularly when we are offered leadership positions. Are we going to go through a glass cliff phenomena? And one has to strategize and think through it quite a bit. Yeah. Okay, so now let me just talk a little bit about, we all know, we've all seen versions of this cartoon. And this is really true. Like, even if there was no baby in this picture, there's something else. There's a mom and dad, there are friends, there are sick relatives, there's something or the other always on this side. So caregiving has always been a woman's role. And so the triple burden is, of course, the productive burden, in which women have to perform, they have to do all the professional things that everybody else does. The reproductive, and by reproductive we just don't mean reproduction, but also caregiving, childbearing, cleaning, caring for family, including children, the sick and the elderly. So I think there's sometimes assumption that if you don't have a child, then you are really free, but it's not that simple. If you have elderly parents or elderly in-laws, organizing the help at home, organizing the caregiver at home, organizing the cooking at home. All of that actually, the burden falls on the woman. Finally, is about community work, which is focused on improvements to community resources and is often voluntary. Now, I find that this is something which is so valuable. It's very important for women to be able to do this, because altruism, doing things for others without, in a voluntary way, is very important for our well-being. And we, as mental health professionals, we all know that. But unfortunately, what happens very often is that because we are so involved in the reproductive, and all the caregiving, that women seldom have time for community work. And you will usually find that the community work, the going out, the volunteering, is often done much more by men than by women. So women tend to then not have enough time for that kind of work, which actually gives one a great sense of well-being, a great sense of being wanted. So the challenge then for women leaders is to how to kind of do all three. Yeah. Again, this is an interesting graph which shows us about, you know, this is Scandinavian, so much better off than Indian or any of our, you know, South Asian countries. But even here, if you look at this graph, they compared the amount of time that a mother spends with the child, if there's daycare, if there's no daycare, and the amount of time that the father spends with the child, if there's daycare, if there's no daycare, and then how much childcare activity mothers do with or without daycare, and how much childcare activities fathers do with or without daycare. So if you can see the red line, it is without daycare. So the mother spends so many minutes per hour. So 502 minutes per day is spent when my mother does not have daycare or childcare available. Whereas just look at the father, less than, you know, around 202 minutes. And it doesn't really matter whether there's daycare or no daycare. So as you can imagine, the presence of daycare or presence of childcare becomes extremely important for women who want to get ahead in their career, who want to become leaders. If you look at the second one about childcare activities, so this is just the time spent, but the childcare activities, you know, mothers in any case spend about 283 minutes per day if there is no childcare, and around 220 minutes per day if there is childcare. Half, the fathers spend half the time, whether there, again, no difference whether there's childcare or not. So it's very clear that if in my organization, I want women to take on more leadership roles, then I have to figure out a way in which they can manage childcare. And if when I say that this is a Scandinavian country where roles are much more equitable, where everything is shared, can you imagine if we did this study in India? I would love for Suhas or Dharani to kind of speculate on what kind of time you know, we will be spending. And it's a good potential research study topic, actually, to kind of see how much time do you know, you clock mothers and fathers. And when you're spending so much time in a day, it's not just time, it's amount of energy you spend with the child. It's the amount of thought you spend with the child. So when all of this is happening, we must remember that if we want women to be leaders, and I'm sure if you did a similar thing for caregiving of elderly parents, of elderly relatives, of sick individuals in the family, you would find a very similar graph for men and women. So I think, again, something very important to keep in mind when you mentor, when you are starting organizations, when you have women colleagues, about how are you going to create institutions which support women in leadership roles by keeping in mind the very nature of you know, care activities that they do. All right, this, I think everybody will be like, yes, you know, all of us go through it. I go through it every day. And it's basically something about difficulties in one's accomplishments or abilities, attributing often success to luck, timing, someone helped me, I had connections. I think most of us go through the imposter syndrome, and it's very important for us to be aware of it, to not give into it, and to constantly look for peer sort of peer support to be able to invalidate some of the imposter syndromes that we have. I was listening to a talk by Julia Gillard the other day, the ex-Australian Prime Minister, about leadership. And she constantly talks about, going through the imposter syndrome. She was the Prime Minister at a time when Australia was full of men in the cabinet. So, I think at whatever level you reach, this is something which shadows us women much, much more than it often shadows men. I find that networking is always a challenge. It's great that, we find ways in which we can network. I'll just give you a small example. Much, much earlier in my career, when my child was about 4 years old, I was selected to be, elected to be the part of the EC of my state psychiatric society. And all the meetings were held in the evening after 8 o'clock. Now, how on earth was I ever going to, go to any meeting with a child whom I had to take care of? And childcare, we know, nannies and all, everybody goes home at 4:35, 5:30. So there was no way I could attend even a single meeting. Those were not the days of Zoom or online meetings. So, so I think simple things like this. And recently I got back to my society and said, you remember that this is what happened. And because I didn't attend 4 meetings, I had to resign from the EC because they said, you haven't attended 4 meetings consecutively. But I think those are the kind of challenges. Not one person asked, why did you not attend? Could we send a cab for you so that you can travel from one end of Bangalore to another? Can we change the timing of the meetings to a Sunday morning when you probably will have somebody at home to support you? None of that really happened because I was probably a token woman at that point. And, it was a predominantly male kind of a group. So I think these are small things that we tend to forget, and networking is very important to get ahead. And so it's very important for women to remember to find ways of networking. I think with online meetings, it's become so much more easier. But once we go back to face, I think it's relevant to do that. I find that the obstetricians have found a way out. They never have evening meetings. They always have morning meetings because predominantly they are women. And so it's much easier for them to do a lunch meeting because it's family friendly in that sense. So some leadership traits that we all need to look at is enterprise and vision, curiosity. I think this is one quality which I think both men and women, but not thinking that I know everything, relying on experts and being curious about other people, listening to other people's stories. I think is extremely important, an important quality of leaders. So giving time to your colleagues to talk about what they feel is important. Selflessness, because I'm bringing this curiosity business here because a lot of times we have the stereotype of a male leader who has a monologue, who keeps talking, who, gives gyan. And we have this whole guru phenomena of pravachans. And so we are conditioned to thinking that a leader means that you have to come and give gyan. And you have to, and anything beyond that, a leader who listens is probably not a good enough leader. A leader who doesn't interrupt is not a good enough leader. So I think all of us have these stereotypes in our mind, and we need to remember that. Humility, courage, of course, like the women I showed you, and empathy. And I think empathy and humility are qualities that women tend to have more than men for various reasons, but they're also seen as signs of weaknesses. And maybe we can take this up in the discussion and see, how we can convert this into something more meaningful. Some tips for all the young women and men who are watching, who want to take on leadership. This is probably common for everyone, but I'm just reiterating it. I think finding your power hour is very important. All of us have a power hour every day or a couple of power hours. These are times our brain works the fastest. Unfortunately, now I'm using my power hour to do Quaddle and Wordle. That's not a good thing, but then I just feel like doing it every day. So basically try and tap into, be aware of your own times of strength and times when you're tired and you can't function very effectively. Try to do more down things when you are not very efficient. do the more challenging things when you're efficient. Multitasking. Now, this is something which, everybody says, oh, women can multitask, men can't. Studies have shown that multitasking is not really very much possible. When you're multitasking and you're using different parts of the brain at the same time, one task will suffer. So instead of doing multitasking, I think it's important to do better time planning and do tasks, or do one very intensive task and one slightly less intensive task. That way you'll be able to give it their best rather than doing two things and going by this, again, this stereotype that women multitask very well. They probably do, but something gives. So I think it's important for us to recognize that. We can discuss procrastination a little later, because I know that women tend to procrastinate because they are perfectionists sometimes. And when they don't get it right, there is a tendency to delay things. Batching tasks, again, a method of time management. I think all of us, thanks to COVID-19, have become very good at managing technology. There's always this thing that women, tend to be a little shy of technology, but we know that that has changed. And I think most of us are now as comfortable. I mean, in my family, I think I'm the better one of really in technology than my husband. So that's a good thing. How not to wear the business badge. So one of the things that women or even men leaders tend to sometimes do is, oh, I'm very busy. And, having the sense that they have to constantly look busy, but that's not really necessary. And it's important to be able to not keep saying, oh, I'm so busy, but trying to figure out a way that, you can make time for other things. We discuss some of these things and we can take them on later. For the younger people, I would also recommend learning how to make effective presentations. It's very important for us to know how to make good slides, how to be clear, how to talk within a certain amount of time, how to get your ideas across. I always tell people that when a presentation seems very easy and simple, it means that hours of preparation has gone behind it, including Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, you name it, whoever. Nobody comes to a meeting or a presentation without preparation. Just because it seems easy, it doesn't mean they haven't prepared. So rehearse. I often tell my young women students that before a seminar, don't just look at your laptop and make slides. Listen to your voice aloud, throw your voice, practice. These are very important things and may seem very simple, but I think, all of us need to learn this very well. We all need to learn how to write applications. We will talk a little bit about career goals and appearing for interviews when the two discussants come in. I think this is another very useful tip, using social media for visibility. In today's age, when social media is very important, learn how to be visible in social media in a way that you get the following that you want, that you're able to say what you want, come through as credible. You don't have to have millions and zillions of followers, but people should kind of be eager to read what you're writing. Tag people who you think might be like-minded. So learning, being social media savvy is very important in today's day and age for leadership. I'm not fantastic at it, I'm trying, but I think it's very important. Getting feedback and then, working with that feedback is very important. I think the most important thing for women is sort of balancing this whole home life issue. And again, I hope we can discuss it and share stories. So I won't take much time, because I think that's a very important thing, and we can discuss it later. I think one of the things that we need is developing a support system and asking for support and accepting it. Because sometimes what happens is that, we tend to think that we need to do it all and are not very good at accepting support. And I think that's something that we all need to get over, and getting over mommy guilt, daughter guilt, friend guilt, in the sense that I'm not doing enough for my mom or parents, I'm not doing enough for my friend, I'm not doing enough for my child. It's something that is constantly reiterating. I think that one of the things best things to do is to check with them. So when my daughter was young and I was, doing all of this stuff that I was doing, I would constantly do a check-in with her, saying, am I an okay enough mother to you? Is there something that I'm not doing okay? Can we have like this one-to-one conversation where, I just want to see that if there's anything else that you need from me, and having those very open conversations. And I learned that for her, it was important that I give a certain amount of time, but I'm there with her 100%. And that's what she wanted from me. And she didn't really want me throughout the day. And she's, even now, she remembers all the times that I spent with her when I was 100% with her, and the learnings that she got from that. So I think it's important for us to get feedback from our family and our kids, and not internalize that guilt too much. Sneha, how am I doing for time?
We can, do you think we could take 5-10 minutes more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I'd like to give some time for discussion. I don't want to be hogging all the limelight. So I think this is an important aspect. So I'll spend some time on it. It's about identifying mentors, approaching them with specific goals. So one of the things that we tend to do as women, sometimes even as men, but I think women do it more often, that we think we need one mentor, and that mentor should be everything for us. I think it's very important to remember that mentor is also human, and each mentor has a different quality. Each mentor has a different skill set, and it's important that we identify different mentors for different things, and not idealize one big mentor who will sometimes then fail us and we feel terribly disappointed. Also look for peer mentors, because mentors don't necessarily have to be somebody very senior, very superior, but there are people around you who can be your mentors. Learn to be a good mentee yourself. A good mentee is somebody who also gives feedback to the mentor, saying, you told me this long back, I remembered it and I did it. And I think it's a very important thing you can tell other, other early career people. I think that is a very important feedback to follow up, to give feedback to your mentor as well. And try to mentor both women and men, and choose mentors who are both men and women. I think that's very important. Sometimes we tend to be focused on one kind of mentor all the time. So it's good for us to see that variety. While we are at this, sometimes, one of the things that I tend to do is, while a lot of my friends are women, I interact a lot with women, I do women's mental health. So as a result, I sort of get into the brains of women quite easily. And sometimes I feel that I don't know how men think. And for the last many years, I watch shows where there are male protagonists. I read male authors, and I tend to talk a lot with men and about their ideas about life and women. It's important for me to also understand the other point of view, and to see how I can then navigate and change or negotiate if I know that point of view. So I think, again, that and that's not just true for men, it's also true for when we are looking at diversity and inclusiveness. So try not to be only with people who are just like you. It's so simple, it's so easy, to be with people who are just like you, who read the same things as you do, who watch the same things as you do, because it's so easy, so fun. But I think it's important for us to diversify and interact with as many people as possible, from as many professions as possible, and all the more with people who are not like you, who have differences, who have ideological differences, because it's important for us to know some of those things. Steps to leadership: apply for leadership positions. I was telling you how I was somebody who never thought I would ever apply for a leadership position. And Professor Helen Herman was the one who's the previous WPA president, who sort of, spoke to me and said, they wanted me to apply for the Secretary General's post in the society. And I was like, I've never done something like this. I have no preparation. But then they sort of sat me down and said why it was important. First of all, it was representation from South Asia. Otherwise, it tends to be all white women. And so it was important for that representation to happen, for for women in South Asia and other countries to see women leaders emerging. And I think so that really helped me. So I think it's important for us. And it was so hard for me to write that first, when you're applying for a post for the elections, you have to basically sell yourself, you have to write your brief and you have to write what you'll give to the organization. It was so hard for me to write things about myself, which are my strengths, which I think I'm good at. And it took a very long time, and many people pushing me to say, oh, but you're good at this. Oh, but you're good at this. So I think let us all kind of write a brief about ourselves. If we had to kind of tell people who we really are. And while doing that, try and be your most authentic self. Speaking up in meetings and conducting meetings are another important leadership quality that one needs to learn. And sometimes I know that many of the people who have logged in here have attended leadership programs, but I think there need to be more women leadership programs. So Julia Gilliard and Ngozi, who is the current WTO director, and I'll show you a picture later of hers, have written a wonderful book called Leadership in Women, where they have interviewed political leaders and other leaders from across the world. And they've also started an institute for women's leadership. And maybe it's time for us to do that in mental health, to start a institute for women's leadership or a summer school for women's leadership, where we talk about some of these things which I'm talking about in 40 minutes in much more detail. Okay, we've already discussed this. We've to some extent discussed this, but I'm sort of putting this image out here. This is an image which was given to me by a young girl when I asked her to make me a slide on time management. This was her vision of time management. And as you can see, she sort of covered a whole range of things and how disjointed sometimes our times are, that we have to move from being something to another thing to another thing. But trying to sort of organize that and prioritizing becomes important. Okay, it's all about the hair. And this to me is very important. One of the things that people ask me a lot, and I have asked people a lot, all the women leaders, how much does appearance matter? Do I have to wear a suit all the time, or when I go to meetings, or do I have to always be in a sari and completely look this older person? Those of us who have worked in medical settings are not unfamiliar with the fact that all the males will be called doctors and all the women will be called sisters. Will be thought as that we are not doctors, we're something else. It's a very common thing. I still remember when I was a faculty, but much younger, in the outpatient, I had two stalwarts who were the consultants with me, Professor Raghuram and Professor Sham Sundar. So as you can imagine, I was completely hidden when both of them used to be there in the outpatient. And one day I walked in and one of my patients came later and said, ma'am, somebody said, is she the secretary? Is she going to tell us when Dr. Raghuram is going to come? And that person then told them, no, she's a senior doctor. So you need to remember that there will be always stereotypes. Do I then need to always look, very old and mature and all of that? I think it's important to develop your own signature style, whatever that style is. And you don't need to look like somebody you're not. And that is something that I encourage all women to think about. The reason I brought these two women, so I told you about Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is now the Director General of WTO. She was chosen in February 2021, and she always has this signature scarf. So she said, I've gotten over this whole crisis thing about what to wear. Whatever happens, I have this signature scarf. All my costumes have the signature scarf. So people recognize me with that. So develop your signature style. Hillary Clinton, in fact, said once that she would like to call her book The Scrunchy Chronicles, because every time she went to a meeting, whether it was negotiating a conflict thing with Iran or Afghanistan or some very high power meeting, the first thing that people wrote about was about her hair. Why is her hair today like this? Why is her hair not like that? So she said she wants to talk about how, and she talks about how her hairstyle was the focus of constant debate. Can you ever imagine? I mean, I was listening to a talk the other day and somebody said, can a woman ever get away with the hairstyle that Boris Johnson has, this unkempt look, scruffy look? Will a woman leader ever get away with something like that? Probably not. But I think it's important for us not to emulate other women just because it is the done thing to do, but to develop your own smart leadership attire. Conflict management and negotiation. How many women around the table? So obviously Lucy has it easier because she's like the strong person, and poor Charlie Brown. But they say that there are 5, if there is a group of 6, you need at least 4 women for the women's voice to be heard. I want to give you an example. I was recently at a very high power meeting where it was a national level meeting. And there was this young woman lawyer who was very smart and who was telling the gray-haired men over there about a certain legal thing which had happened and which they had to adhere to. I was there as an expert, and there was just one other woman. It was about 5 other men. And this gray-haired man, older man, kept calling this lawyer bacche, bacche, bacche. Bacche aap bata rahe ho, theek hai, magar ye bhi suno. Bacche aapko ye pata. I mean, it was the most infuriating thing that I've ever seen. Here was a woman, she was much younger, of course, but I think this whole attitude of infantilizing women, of making even a professional woman feel as if she's a bacha. When you're in a team of equals, age should not matter. You should not use terminology like that. And these are things I think we should gradually teach men, because it just happens to them by default. Not all men, but many men. And this was a very important high-level decision which was being made for the country. So I had to kind of step in and say, can we listen to Mess so-and-so talk, because I think she's saying something very important. And it required that degree of assertiveness. So I think the other thing that I would like to emphasize is that women should speak up for other women. And that's very important when we talk about lift as you climb. One of the things which is a very classic thing is that if there are 2 women, there's bitchiness, there are cat fights, they compete with each other. Men compete with each other, but that's never called something wrong. So if you have a position where 2 women are vying for the same position, or if there are 2 women who don't agree, it's quite all right to differ from each other. And I think it should not be immediately construed to be a cat fight or something, terrible. And we need to bring in that. But at the same time, I think we need to also recognize that disagreement should not be taken out of that boardroom. And we should always, and I read this something which always stayed with me, that we need to make sure that we lift women along with us and be there as champions for other women. And I have tried to do that. There are times I may not have done it the most effectively, but I have tried to do that. And when sometimes there are differences, I always go back and reflect and try not to make it personal. So having something like a reflective base about some of this is very helpful. I'm going to skip this because it's about conflict resolution. And I think we have discussed some of these things. I think I find that most women use the term we a lot. And I think that's a very good thing. There is a myth that a leader should use the word I, but I always use the word we whenever I'm discussing something, because we are always, a leader is never alone. A leader is always with the team. So it's important for us to be seen as part of a team. In terms of resilience, again, when we talked about COVID, I think one of the things which gave women the edge, and this was a wonderful index which has brought out, the South Asian Women's Resilience Index, the flexible thinking and optimism are sort of characteristics. We've gone through a lot of this. We've gone through this as well. But I want to emphasize here that these 2 qualities have always led to better outcomes, and research has shown that. Self-doubt and self-awareness. So finally, what is transformative leadership? in the end, when you distill all of this, men or women, I think what is important is aligning people who are with you with meaning and purpose, being less transactional and more strategic, using feedback and direction, and finally putting people ahead of themselves. So I think that, to my mind, is the characteristic of a woman's style of leadership. And I think that should be the style of leadership for anybody, actually, for an institution, a country, an organization, to get ahead. And it's not about the leader getting ahead. Why is the leader there in an organization? It is to lead the organization. So I think that if we kind of work that, why is there a leader to lead the country? It is to take the country ahead. It's not about a one person. I think if we get that in our minds, then a lot of the leadership riddle can get solved. And of course, finally, we have to end with Frida Kahlo, who said, at the end of the day, we can endure much more than we think we can. This is my Twitter handle. So for those of you who want to follow my little tiny social media presence, please feel free. I'm going to stop here and allow my young colleagues to talk. Sorry for taking more than what I thought I would.
Part of actually seeing the change in the society around us includes that we can start with what we can do. And I guess that is where we feel that as, I wanted to bring in a unique male perspective into this. And that was the fact that while we cannot obviously drive the agenda of how a woman's leadership should be, or what are the shapes and forms in which it must actually grow or thrive, that is up to the woman to take initiative in that and decide. I think that what we can start off with as men is to be mindful of our biases that exists in within ourselves first, and then within the environment around us, and to sort of perhaps unlearn some of these biases and relearn more inclusive behavior. And at least that's the model that has kind of worked for me over the past 5-6 years. I mean, if you probably found anyone talking about the fact that they're completely gender inclusive, I think they would be lying. So at least, at least it's my opinion that they would be lying. I think that for the past 5-6 years, time and again, when I reflect upon some of the thoughts and actions and behaviors in the work environment and at home, we realize that there are a lot of opportunities for men to actually kind of unlearn and relearn and be more inclusive in our patterns of thinking and behavior that can foster this women's leadership growth. Now, couple of other things is that as a male, I think I also wanted to say that it is important not to be insecure. I mean, I think this is something that I think ma'am brought about in her presentation, wherein there is that kind of adjectives that we use. Okay, let me take a popular example. Say Virat Kohli. For the lack of a better term, I'll use the word alpha male or sigma male or whatever it is that the term, that adjectives that they use. Very aggressive and go-getter, and these are the kind of the adjectives that we use, isn't it? He knows what he wants and he gets there. He doesn't hesitate to do. Let's imagine for a second the captain of the women's Indian cricket team actually being like that, or at least a version of that wherein she expresses herself. What would be the adjectives that we will actually use? Would it be that she's expressing herself? Would we use that adjectives? Would we say that she's kind of, being a good leader? She's imbibed her own sense of leadership? Or would it be that, we use terms like she's being bossy, she's just being too noisy, cacophonous, or whatever it is? Now, when I think about such patterns of subtle biases that exists either in our minds, in the mainstream media, and in the culture around us, I think that's the sort of changes that we as men should actually kind of be aware of about these biases and try to kind of, unlearn some of these things. And at a very environmental level, I guess we should be able to make these transitions within our immediate environment so that collectively over a period of time that will transition into something more impactful and something more meaningful. And if we bring this inclusiveness culture into our workspace, and I guess that will create at least a safe environment for some of our female colleagues to express themselves, and that I think should be healthy enough. On that note, I actually had a few questions rather than a few ideas myself, and that was that is it truly important for us to distinguish a woman's style of leadership from a man's style of leadership? Or is it the fact that that's one successful model of leadership which most successful women have actually shown us. And that is something that even men can emulate for that matter. And on a related note, and I wanted to kind of, open this particular, I wanted opinion of both of the other ladies on this particular aspect, is that we know about the fact that women are more inclusive as leaders, but it comes at a cost, doesn't it? There is something called as the inclusiveness penalty. You try to take everybody along, you try to kind of, be accommodative of every person's views in your team and in your leadership. And then comes the dialogue, oh, they just don't know what they're trying to figure out. They're trying to kind of, let everybody kind of, it's not possible. Whereas you kind of, see the narrative of some successful male leaders. Oh, they know what they want. They know when to kind of, cut people off and stuff like that. So I wanted to ask both the leaders who are, my other two discussants. There is one is ma'am, and of course Dr. Dharani has to. Is there actually an inclusiveness penalty, and how do we counter that narrative?
We'll keep noting down your questions, Suhas, for good time management, and then get back.
Right. On that note, then I'll finish off. I'll take 2 more minutes, Sneha, if that's okay with you, and then finish a few more of the doubts that I had. Second thing is that many large institutions as well, have a very skewed gender representation in their departments and their workforce. So, how I think some of them are there here with us as participants. So, how can a woman leader who is at an early part of her career express herself in such an environment more confidently and become the best version of the leader that she's meant to be? How do we create a safe space for that? And when there is a lack of such a safe space, how do we actually ensure that she brings about that momentum for creating a safe space herself? And second thing is that is there, of course, we always talk about when we have seminars and discussions and debates, we talk about the Indian models in various levels. So I want to also bring about, is there an Indian model of women's leadership? I tend to think that there is. I mean, ideally for a nation that is that houses one of the oldest civilizations, we have learned a lot from our past, and there are a lot of women leaders in our history that we can be inspired by. And of course, as in culture, we have a lot of challenges to this particular paradigm of how to empower women. We have somewhere lost the message, from at one end, of talking about women as being our gods and, being respectful and stuff like that. We have come to having a lot of cultural and environmental challenges wherein we don't actually translate that into reality. But then I'm sure that there must be some traits that characterize Indian or Southeast Asian leadership. And so what are those traits? And I also wanted to point out that, this is just one small story I wanted to share. A young working woman, and she's a client that I'm seeing, and I have her permission to share this aspect of the story, is that she was working in a team in an IT company, and then she was moving on to a new job, wherein it was a dream job. And she was going to be the lead of this particular team. And it involved a lot of international clients and a very prestigious thing, which no woman had actually gone there before. And she was actually shattering the glass ceiling of sorts. She comes to me and with a lot of anxiety and distress, and her main concern was the fact that she was carrying. She was about 8 weeks pregnant, and then she was like, her whole world was right now filled with a lot of distress. She is like, can I reveal the news to the team? Would I be kicked off the team? Would I be given the same opportunity? And or would I be robbed of this opportunity? And she has toiled hard to get there. It's been almost 10 to 12 years of work that she has put in from her younger days, and probably did much more to reach where she has reached. And so while I did not have immediate solutions, one of the things that I did tell her was to say that, this is possibly the happiest time of your life, wherein you're celebrating 2 successes and not just one. And the fact that the environment where you are in makes it difficult for you to express this aspect of your life, wherein you are actually having a personal milestone, means to say that the problem is with the environment. So I don't think that the problem is there with you for you to be so guilty and about everything. So then we found avenues of how to solve the problem, and she's doing much better. And of course, she got that particular job that she deserved. So, and she's doing well. But this brings an important aspect into question, and that's like, so how do we actually this is possibly happening to most successful women all around us. So how do we ensure that work cultures are actually changed so that just because of the fact that they take up triple roles, they should not be robbed of the successes that they deserve based on their hard work of the one of the roles that they're doing quite well. So should we encourage more sabbaticals? Should we say that, let her dictate her pace and then the career trajectory will just go on? So how do we do that? And how do you do that in, say, mental health and psychiatry and psychology and psychiatric social work or nursing? And how do we ensure that that happens? And lastly, I think imposter syndrome is so important for all of us to be aware of it, to recognize it, and to sort of change the narrative of our own lives to kind of accept some of the successes that come our way and to become the better versions of ourselves and try to be whatever we can be. And in that context, I also want to highlight sometimes imposter syndrome can also be induced. I have seen a few patients or clients of mine, or even in some work cultures, wherein there is subtle kind of an message that goes across from the environment that kind of makes it easier for a lady to suffer from an imposter syndrome than possibly a male. I think that that aspect of it was something that, again, we need to address through some systemic changes. So these were some thoughts and ideas on the subject. And of course, there were a lot of questions out there. And I look forward to hearing from both Dr. Dharani and Professor Prabha.
We'll take Dr. Dharani first, and we'll go on addressing questions soon after that.
Thanks,
Is it okay, Dr. Prabha?
Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to say thank you, Suhas, for raising. I've been sort of trying to keep up with you and putting down all the points. And I'm sure many of these points can come up in discussion, but I think you raised the inclusiveness penalty, I think, is something that we need to probably address, and the Indian style of women's leadership. As Dharani talks, I'll reflect on some of these and we can discuss it. Thank you so much, Suhas.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Prabha, for that really inspiring talk on women's leadership. And Dr. Suhas, you raised a lot of interesting questions, some of which are related to what I was thinking about, especially this concept of second generation gender bias, which is not in your face. It's not at all in your face that everybody is so, we will not discuss, we will have gender equality, inclusion. There's a lot of talk about it, but I still feel that a lot of that in practice is missing, in the sense that it's only on paper. Organizational structures are not very sensitive to women's needs. Let's say, for example, something that you raised, what happens to a woman who is pregnant and is going on a maternity break, or is taking a few, maybe a break from career to care for the family in the initial parts? How are they received when they come back? How do you explain? Do they even get an interview to discuss why they had to take a break? Or is it just pushed away from the beginning? Especially in leadership roles, I wonder, a lot of roles require maybe travel, maybe requiring more support. How are the organizations supporting a woman in leadership? It's not just enough to say, okay, I have appointed a woman as a leader in my organization, and you have the skills, now go ahead. But how are we supporting them? What about travel? Are you going to accommodate? I know a couple of organizations currently have started doing this, where they provide, for example, have a travel policy. So women leaders who are traveling they have made venues for them to have a caretaker with the child and travel with the child. Now that's supporting a leader, a woman leader, right? So a lot of that was a sensitivity to women's needs and requirements at different stages of their career, letting them have the flexibility, I wonder. Like, this is something that I've been thinking about. Like you said, when you raised one, Dr. Suhas, you were talking about this client of yours who came up and said, I'm pregnant right now, I don't know whether I want to talk about it. There's a lot of options when you go ahead and tell that. They say, oh, now she's going to go on maternity leave. There's going to be this. There's a lot of assumption of what the woman is going to do, rather than just ask her, how do you want to balance this out? How can we be there to help you out? I feel like a lot of these policies are still gendered. The structure is still gendered, and a woman coming into that makes it very difficult for them. Dr. Prabha talked about the glass cliff, and I was just thinking about how even as you rise higher, because there's a scarcity of women in those positions, you're under more scrutiny. There's a lot more focus on every decision, every outcome that you produce, and then it is all based on your gender. So there's a lot of pressure, which is not just about bringing about outcomes, but also how is this going to be portrayed? Am I going to influence opportunities for other women who are coming up in this organization. So it's not just a pressure of productivity there, but also how many other women am I going to be influencing if I don't do the right things here, if I don't come out successful in this position. While we talked about this, I was also thinking about some things that I have faced as an early career professional. And I was just thinking about how I have not actually voluntarily chosen leadership roles. And I was like, why did I never do that? And I noticed that there's these things of, can I do it? Am I going to be competent enough? More importantly, do I have the support for this? I have different life changes happening. I'm getting married, I'm having kids. And how am I balancing all of this with a higher position, which may require more investment of time and energy? How am I going to balance this out? What are people doing to support me in this? Whether even if I have a supportive spouse, how is my organization helping me? Not going to be possible backing out of these roles. And the few times that I did venture to take like a leadership role in a small part of it, I found that the feedback I received made a big difference. If it was something that said, you're not doing enough, it's not effective enough, that was it. And I'm not fit to do this role. I'm not bold. I'm not assertive enough. I can't make my voice be heard in a group, among a group of men. So then maybe that's not a role for me. But on the other hand, when I've had Ressa say, you did well, you tried to build this, you're taking into consideration what everybody wants, you're making, helping out, listening to people, you're motivating them, and that's what we need. I felt like, okay, maybe that's something. And that made me think about leadership identity that we develop. It's not something that we all have. And it develops as a process where recognition, affirmation, appreciation, support plays a major role in making it your central or enduring aspect of yourself, that I can do this, rather than I'm not good at this. And here comes the whole mismatch of, I think, what we traditionally view as leadership qualities, which are mainly masculine, being decisive, being bold, being assertive. And like I think Dr. Suhas also raised, a woman portraying that can come across as aggressive. She's being so aggressive in this position. Why is she doing this? And when you take a more nurturing, democratic style, you say, oh, they're so indecisive, so emotional. And this is the perception of women who are trying to take up leadership roles, which are different from the traditional ones. There's a lot of conflict. And when there is conflict, another thing I realized is that if you don't feel connected with these values, if you're not a person who really believes that I have to push or bulldoze my way and my ideas are the same, rather than thinking, okay, let me pause back, think about what I'm hearing and make a more open view to things, I will feel inauthentic and ineffective as a person and as a leader. And I might also be perceived if I'm pretending to be more bold than I am. It clashes. So I feel all of this will again affect our roles as leadership. And I also wanted to just mention a few things, like in terms of role models and mentors that Dr. Prabha was talking about. And I found these extremely helpful for me, having a mentor who kind of tells me, what is your career plan? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because all I was thinking about from work was I should be personally satisfied, should be able to balance my work and personal life, and I'm sorted. But when someone asked me, where do you see yourself 5 years from now or 10 years from now? I really didn't have an answer, and said, we need for you to have a professional development plan. What are you going to do more? And that was the first time I sat down and looked at what am I doing with my career? I have spent 7-8 years studying. What am I doing with this henceforth? How my career is going to look at. And I felt that was very essential to have a mentor who was able to tell me this is what you can do. And even if you have these breaks in life, how do you get back? How do you network? Who was also kind of pushing to say, you know what, why don't you speak up here? I'm going to connect with this person. Why don't you talk to them and form a connection? You take this forward. You take this project forward. And I was like, so not confident, but also prepping you for that. That's the role of a mentor, to looking at saying, talk about this. You know what you want. What's stopping you from reaching out to these people and connecting with them? So I feel like having these mentors and role models are extremely essential. It creates this sense of, and I feel like it's more psychosocial than maybe just telling you do this, not strategic necessarily, but I find that the space that you have where you are safe, you can ask these questions without feeling stupid about asking them, and having this, who talk about their struggles and how they connected, actually a very, very affirming and helpful for women to move forward in leadership roles. So a lot of mentoring is something that I really encourage. And I agree with Dr. Suhas on this particular thing, where we also need to sensitize men to these subtle forms of gender discrimination that happens very subtly, that goes in, because I know for a fact that in organizations which are talking about diversity, inclusion, equity in the workspace, when a woman gets promoted, it's often seen, oh, you know what, we have a diversity and inclusion program, that's why this woman has gotten promoted, not because of the skill set. And sometimes women wonder, say, okay, in this entire team, I'm the only woman. So now am I getting promoted because I'm the only woman and we have this program going on? Or is it? So there's a lot of questioning, which I think also adds to that imposter syndrome. Did I reach here because I'm being given special privilege? Or is it because I'm actually worthy of it? So sometimes all these programs, though are very essential, can also backfire in different ways if the principle of it is lost in the process of just procedures, is what I wanted to say. So thank you, and I hope we can take forward questions.
Sneha, do you want me to step in? Or
Yes,
do you
Dr.
want to
Prabha, we'd love to hear from you, and also
some questions?
Questions. So maybe we'll start. I know you had noted points after Dr. Suhas and after Dr. Dharani as well.
Yeah. So maybe I will respond to questions which have come from the audience first, then kind of get back. And I'm sure there may be other people in the audience who want to speak. So please speak up, and, we'd love to hear what you have to say, because we have, fortunately, a good 30 minutes left to hear your voice. But just to sort of, and I'm sure there are quite a few leaders in this audience who can chip in and talk as well. So do you have examples you can share in general or from COVID times? I think we kind of shared quite a few examples over the course of my talk about different political leaders, different leaders from institution, organizations. We know that many scientists you had every day Soumya Swaminathan, who was coming in, from WHO and talking decisively about certain things, and yet being extremely inclusive in the way she was giving in information. WHO always brought out a front of 4 or 5 people who would talk as a team, and I think that was something that was a good example. And we have many such examples with Dr. Gagandeep Kang, with the health minister, Shailaja teacher from Kerala, who's a big role model for me, who many of them were actually bringing in this important ways. And there were leaders in every little area, every little department during COVID. Many women leaders, including in our department, where Dr. Pratima was the leader at that point, and made sure that the well-being of students was paramount and was being looked after by a variety of methods. So I think there were several. I mean, if you look around, you'll see several examples of leadership. Shalini writes firebrand, but I think she meant that that's the kind of label women get. Raksha has talked about a few things which we've already discussed, and she said, what strategies would you suggest institutions take? And I think I will take off from where Dharani mentioned that policies should not be tokenism, including childcare leave and maternity leave. I know that, fortunately, I'm in a department which is relatively women friendly, even though there are very few women in the faculty positions, but people are quite sensitive. But I know that there are places where maternity leave is really frowned upon. It's almost the woman is made to feel guilty that she's taking time off. And I have often told people that, as men or as other women, this woman is doing something for society. Having a child is actually giving something to society. And it's a societal duty that she's doing. And it is our duty to support her in that societal duty. So just stop complaining and do what it takes, take on her role, take on her burden, and get on with it. This is something she's entitled to. The 6 months is something she's entitled to. And if sometimes she needs to take a little 3 months more, then, you know, let her have it. Because we are raising children, we are raising citizens for the future country or for the future world. And it's very important that mothers and parents really, in fact, I feel that there should be much bigger, better policies for paternity leave. It is only then that men will also be equally participatory in child rearing, because I think it becomes such a woman's issue. Nanny's not come, woman takes leave. Parent teacher meeting, woman takes leave. Child has to get a vaccination, woman takes leave. Shouldn't be like that. The man should be able to say, my nanny's not come, my wife has an assignment, I need to take leave. Like, let's encourage that kind of discussion. I think child care in institutions and organizations and in places is so important, because that's one thing which I think is it's very, very necessary. Safety, safe places to work, safe places to travel. I know that when a lot of the IT sector women started traveling, hotels would have 1 floor or 2 floors exclusively for women, because otherwise there were incidents where women would feel unsafe. So do these things which kind of facilitate women to travel, to network. Like I said, meeting times, you know, all of these things can be handled. Don't frown if a woman leader wants to leave at 5:30 and says, I just have to leave. You don't have to be a fantastic leader. You're not a fantastic leader if you stay on till 8 o'clock in the night. You know, it isn't essential. It's about managing time and it's about doing it effectively. So I think these are some things they can do. What are the qualities a woman should nurture to thrive in an environment which is dominant with men? I think a lot of it was discussed. I think having a mentor, multiple mentors, learning to speak up. Sometimes I have rehearsed, you know, there are meetings within department organizations where obviously it's easy for me to speak. But there are other higher level meetings that I have been to, which are male dominated, which are very high power, where I rehearse, I write things down, and I say it out loud, and I try to get my words right. And I test it out with somebody else. How does this sound? So I don't think sometimes it's very easy. You just need to do it. And this is not only for women. I'm saying that even men sometimes often need to do it, you know. So sometimes some leadership issues are common to both men and women. They're not exclusively women. Rukshida has highlighted something very important, and that is importance of understanding intersectionality in leadership. And I think when we talked about the inclusiveness penalty, right? I think that we're not being inclusive enough, actually. You know, I think everybody's voices need to be heard. And if you're seeing something which is happening, which is not right, there's active discrimination, I think it is important for you to speak up. I think it's important to everybody to feel, included in whatever you're doing, because the price that you pay, I mean, the flip side, the fallout of this inclusive penalty is not bad. I mean, it's good, you know. Ultimately, it leads to a good outcome. You may be seen as, oh, she's listening to her and listening to him and listening to her. But I think in the end, you get a view which is what the people in the organization may want. And you're then delivering that. You know, in the end, it's not about how you look. It's not about posturing. It's about outcomes. And I think if a leader remembers that, then that's a very important thing.
Dr. Prabha, there are also a few questions that we received during registration. Would you like me to take it up?
Sure.
Some questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Some of the questions that participants said have also been answered already.
Yeah.
About qualities of how to be a good leader, how to find a mentor. I also noticed there was a question, how to prevent backstabs. And after hearing your talk, I wonder whether that's very specific to females. And like you said, men also fight. They also argue, may not agree, personal domain, work domain.
Yeah, I would just like to handle two of them. One is backstabbing, and the previous one was something you mentioned, how to find a mentor. Yeah. So I think though we've discussed that, oh, you should have mentors and different mentors, I think sometimes you might need to reach out of your organization to find a mentor, because you may not get what you want in your own organization, or you may be working alone. You may be having a single person practice, or you may want a domain expert who is in a different kind of domain. I think you need to be able to reach out. So when you go to conferences, one of the things I always tell my younger colleagues is to make a note of all the people whom you want to go and meet. Find out which sessions they're going to be at, and tell them, give them a little note and say, or email them beforehand and say, I have a poster on such and such a topic on such and such a day. It'd be wonderful if you came, because I've read all your work and I would like your comments on it. It works, because mentors are also suckers for that kind of praise, so it works, and people will come and they will talk to you, and you will find a mentor for life very often. I have found some wonderful mentors by actually being very strategic in approaching people, and asking them for support and help. And I get lots of emails from across the world of people wanting to be working with me, being mentored by me. And a good mentor will always respond and say, is it possible, not possible? In fact, a lot of the conferences now have mentor-mentee programs. And I find that the conferences which have mentor-mentee programs are often the organizing secretaries and chairs are women, because I think we understand the relevance and importance of that kind of mentoring. So I think that finding a mentor is, and reaching out and sort of, learning from mentors is very, very important. In fact, now, after reading about mentorship and all that, I actually am thinking of writing to Julia Gillard and saying, you started this women's leadership thing. Do you think you could mentor me in starting something similar in India? Because we need it. So I think it's about lifelong kind of mentorship. Backstabbing, I think, like you said, Sneha, that kind of unhealthy competition sometimes exists between any two people, be it men or women. But I think women need to really guard against it even more, because you're very few of you. And it's important for you to be constantly reflecting on what is going on. Sometimes I try to, when I find that I'm being challenged and somebody's being unreasonable, another woman, instead of getting terribly angry, I always try to find a backstory to it, because there must have been some reason why she's behaving like this with me today, or something like that. I would definitely not say it's hormonal at any point, but I would try and find possible reasons why. What did I do? What did she do? Was there a backstory? Did somebody say something to her? Try to analyze it, to reflect on it, rather than be reactive. Try to be responsive. I think that's very important. It's also important to have champions with you, both male and female champions in an organization. At the cost of being a little personal, I just saw Dr. Matthew over here in the audience, and I really want to say thank you to him, because he was a big champion. He's always been a champion for women leaders. One of those people who doesn't feel insecure or threatened by women leaders. And when he was head of department, he gave me complete independence to completely change the academic atmosphere, completely change the exam pattern. Unheard of, and he didn't take any credit for it. He would always say, she did it, check with her. So I think being surrounded by champions, both men and women, is very important, and institutions should try and encourage these kind of champions who will then enhance the visibility of women, because women tend to be reticent, tend to be in the background. Even if they do something, they'd like to project a man in front and, oh no, yeah, I just did it, it wasn't anything great. But I think to be able to give the words to women to say, I did this, I often make people write down what they have done and say it out loud. How to write a bio, how to write a good CV. These are things that need to be taught, which are unfortunately not taught. So I think these are simple things that one can, do to encourage women to be out there.
We also,
other
if I
questions?
may add, on the same note, we do have some questions and a couple of comments. I'll read it out. The participant says that I've noticed women are being more exacting as well as harming the cause. Why do you think that is? What can be done to change that? How do you deal with internalized patriarchy? The participant goes on to say that the most women in the events, they end up crediting the male, their partners, their children as their support system, and how that helped them achieve what they did today, and how to the participant it sounds very patronizing. And there are a few more questions around the area about how overcoming patriarchy, managing in a male dominating society, how to not hurt the egos of the male. And we'd like to get your thoughts.
Like I said, it's a huge challenge, and but it's not difficult. And I think the more women you have in the room, the better it is. Like I said, even as a child, I saw all the deference being paid to male bada bhais and the male children and things like that. So it is something that is so, so deeply rooted in our culture that, when Suhas says, is there a style of Indian women's leadership? I think the Indian women's leadership is the first step is to kind of fight that patriarchy, which is so internalized within oneself. There are very few of us who have been able to escape that and not internalize it very much by constant dialogue, by constant questioning. So I don't think there's anything wrong in crediting people who have helped you. There's nothing wrong in that. Like I know a lot of men who credit their wives and their mothers or something like that. So there's nothing wrong. But I think when it becomes more like something which is expected and deferential is when the problem arises. And I think if it's coming from a place of internalized patriarchy, then it becomes a problem. And I think it's important for everybody to speak up. I'll just give you a small example without naming names. So the fairly strong woman leader who just kind of taken over a leadership role. We were in a meeting, and I found that the chief guest was a male, alpha male, and I found that the males were just gravitating towards that person and were just not giving an opportunity to the woman who was the leader of that organization to actually interact with that chief guest. I mean, it was like, terrible. And I just saw it and I was annoyed with it because, even in terms of seating, you should have seating which kind of emphasizes that this woman is in control. You don't do that, then you're creating, problems. So, I took one of the men aside and I said, what you're doing is not correct. She's the one who should be sitting next to the chief guest. She's the one who should be having all the conversation. He may be your buddy, he may be whatever, but this is where she should be because that is her rightful place. So please just ensure that that happens, So I think speaking up for your own women colleagues in leadership positions, because sometimes they may not be able to do so all the time, and challenging the status quo, even sometimes at the cost of being a little unpopular, is important and needs to happen. It has to be affirmative action from everybody at all points. That's, I think, very important.
The next set of questions are about balancing major milestones in life and work. And the question comes in context of, say, there's a woman in young 20s who's preparing to take up leadership roles in the workplace, but also dealing with a lot of shifts, such as settling down, going to a new home, building family, realigning daily routine. And this comes with a conjunction to another question that what role does the spouse and the children play as a support system? And partly we have discussed this and answered it. Would you like to comment more about this?
I mean, I would like also Suhas and Dharani to come in, maybe in some of these, wherever you feel, please pipe in, doesn't have to be me.
Yeah, thanks, ma'am. So I think that's important as I said, for every male figure in a woman's life, to be aware that she has her own personal ambitions and career and a life independent of the family, and we need to be part of the system that will help her to provide space for her to actually excel where she can. No, it's not that we can take credit for that particular thing that she's doing, but just to ensure that she gets an adequate opportunity to do that. I think it's very important. It's as simple as what Madam was telling about taking a day off when the nanny is not at home. How many of us do that? A parent-teachers meeting wherein wherein a mother cannot attend, and or as simple as a conference that let's talk about a 4-day conference for a young mother. Will the father be up to the job of saying that, okay, 4 days, you please go ahead and come back, and then we'll actually we need to make this more possible. And I guess the males that are there in the life and the other persons also in the life of women should make it possible to do so. Just to digress, and a couple of notes about finding a mentor, because I think it's very, very important. For me, Professor Prabha was one of the mentors that I look up to, and will look up to in the future. And one of the important things that I have noted is to ensure that you actually need to finalize your mentor not at an early stage. You don't need to do that. It's not that you commit to a mentor and you're like, okay, behold, for life you're going to be my mentor, and whatever it is, I'm going to stick with you. It's about opening avenues of networking with a group of people who inspire you, whom you look up to from both the genders, and then kind of look into ways and mechanisms in which you can collaborate with them, you can work with them, and then try to kind of see how that takes off. And also choose mentors who are available, who are accessible. This is very, very important. Often I see a lot of young early career professionals coming and wanting more face time with the possibly the person who is very, very busy at a senior professor level. It's difficult. Even for them, it's very, very difficult. They have all the right intentions in the world, but then they have a lot of priorities on their table, and it becomes difficult. So it's possibly good to find a mentor who is midway through the career progression, or at least in the early stages of their peak career progression, so that you can actually get some time with them to let them mold you. And most importantly, it is important not to sit on the mentor, lean on them. There's a difference. We cannot go to our mentors and say, I have a whole lot of issues, and just throw it at them and say that you fix this for me. So it's important to come prepared whenever you have your FaceTime with your mentors, and try to kind of brainstorm a few ideas, and also have a trajectory of 1 or 5-year duration plans that you bring on the table, which the mentor can guide you with. So I think that these are some other important couple of things that I wanted to add. And over to you, Dr. Dharani.
Right. I just wanted to add a couple of things with what Dr. Prabha was talking about, and this entire thing about support and how men were playing a role in your life. I think it came to a highlight and a lot of focus during the COVID and the pandemic, where both men and women were working from home, but it somehow was up to the women to sit with the kids during their online classes. It was about taking care of the household when there was no house help, which were all available. You could outsource responsibilities, but the COVID brought us to look at what are actually shared responsibilities. The whole thing about patriarchy, like I said, it's not in your face for a lot of people right now, but often as women, we ourselves don't recognize that we have these patriarchal mindsets in our life, that we even if it's happening to us, you don't really recognize that that's going on. So I feel like awareness, not only for men and to make them more sensitive, but for women to say, hey, you know what, this is patriarchy, you need to do something different about this, is also essential. And I agree with this whole advocacy and championing of women and bringing them forward, because it has really helped. It helps to hear someone say, hey, you know what, she has a voice, why don't you listen to her? She's trying to say something, why don't you all listen to her? That's so much affirming, that boosts your confidence a lot. So I think that's a real task. Finding a mentor is very difficult. At least for me, it was very difficult to find. And I'm still searching for a mentor, but I have a few figures in life who do serve the roles that we have. And that's when I realized that having a mentor is quite essential for you to have a career and move forward. People to tell you what you're doing is not okay. People who are telling you that you need to do more of this, less of this. How do you go about it? I think something that Dr. Prabha was saying about going to conference and networking, one of the most difficult things that I have ever done. And it helped that, my mentor kind of told me, this is what I want you to do. I know you are this kind of a person. So you know what? There is this one professor who I think will be easy for you to contact, start talking to them about your work, connect with them, liaison with them, email them. This is what you can do. It's a really helpful thing and something that I learned through PhD to use and utilize to develop networks. So yes, I do believe, just wanted to add those points in between.
On this note, I just want to ask Professor Prabha a question, and this is with respect to the fact that, ma'am, while you were the HOD, you were leading possibly one of the largest departments in the country. And I still remember that when most of us had a whole lot of issues that we used to mail you about, or which we used to contact your office, you always seemed to make that time for us to hear us out, to genuinely kind of give us a patient listening, and you helped us out, and which made you a great mentor figure. So how do actually successful women leaders who have a lot on their plate make time for important things such as these?
First of all, thank you for that feedback, Suhas. I'm sure I wasn't good always, and I wasn't responsive always, but I tried. So sometimes for students and colleagues, it's about, at least it's you're trying, you may not solve all their problems, but you're listening to them. And many times problems can't be solved, but at least if you're listening to them, that's okay. Somebody told me the other day that, if you want work to happen, ask a busy person, So I think people who have a lot on their plate figure out a way of finding time and dividing it. And I would still think it's that whole passion and purpose business, that if you are 3 years in HOD, then you know that those 3 years, I mean, for me, it was okay. After 3 years, I get some break, but those 3 years, give it all you have. And that's been one of my mantras, be it with students or with patients. And I often tell all my colleagues also that when you are with somebody, if you're with your child, be 100%. If you're with your food, be 100%. I mean, it's a kind of mindfulness, but a bit more than that. If you're talking to a patient on rounds, be 100%, So I think even if you have 5 minutes and you give 100%, you'll probably be much more productive than trying to juggle too many things at the same time. I want to respond to Sneha's one very important point about milestones in life. And, like you go from, women have multiple milestones. One of the biggest issues for women, and I'm supporting a lot of young women. I have supported a lot of young women. I have been supported. Of course, there is childbirth, but before there's childbirth, for many women, there's PCOD, there's endometriosis, there's IVF. Then there is the whole every month challenges of managing, dysmenorrhea, etc., and no loose in the outpatient block, or when you're traveling, it's a nightmare. Then you sort of have other reproductive challenges which happen, and then of course the time your hot flushes hit, and that's another huge, another huge big boulder that you face. So it is very true that it happens, and the way that I have supported a lot of women through that, or I try to support, is try to tell them to look at leadership in that, little ways of leadership. So maybe you don't have to go to a big conference. Maybe you can do something small and be a leader in that. Do something which is possible for you in your small way. Try to facilitate that woman is able to do a few things within the constraints of whatever she has. A leadership doesn't always mean emulate the topmost director or the dean or the head of department. Doesn't mean that, you can become a leader in small things that you do, have small working groups that you can have. So I think it's about, it doesn't have to be in psychiatric societies that you're a leader. Those are steps you take. So I think it's also about that, and also about supporting women through some of these phases of life. Some women may have it very easy, no issues, but many women don't. And being extremely understanding of that. and understanding how challenging that is, not just physically, but psychologically, how challenging it is, and how women are striving to do all of that despite all the problems that they're facing. So I think this is something that I think men also need to be constantly be very aware of, and not dish it and kind of say, oh, she's PMSing or something like that. Like, that's not done. And if anybody's saying that, then, call them out. And I think it's very important for women and men who are watching patriarchy happening, or, disparaging remarks said even in private. So one of the things that, Dharani, like you mentioned, a lot of politically correct things are said in front of you, but in private, there's a lot of, nonsense that goes on. And I think it's very important for us as women and as male colleagues to kind of say, you know what, this is not acceptable. You can't say this, even if it's in private. There's a lot of misogyny, and I have been, I've heard so much in being said in front of me. And sometimes I shudder to think that if this is said in front of me, what are the things they say about women behind my back, or in buddy groups or whatever, in their beer parties or whatever. I know that some of it is said in fun and jest, but I think when there is misogyny, that you can identify it. So call it out is what I would say. We shouldn't simper and keep quiet. We should bring it out and say, you know what, that's not okay. You shouldn't say things like that. I think that's something that the message which needs to go. There is Matthew Verghese has been very prolific today.
Thank you, Dr. Prabha, for sharing your thoughts, and Dr. Suhas and Dr. Dharani. I'll just read out a comment from the chat box. We do have a couple of questions, and I'll be happy to send it across to you, Dr. Prabha, and both the discussants. Some participants, we've got more questions and more comments, and I'm sure this talk has, everybody's reflecting and putting their thoughts here. So there's more, and I would love to send you. I can assure to the participants, if there are more questions, please put it in the chat box.
Yeah,
or
just the
send it to
last thing,
us.
last little thing which Matthew has also written. It's about,
Yes,
men being given more opportunities for childcare through paternity leave, through acceptance of doing more so-called female roles. I would also say, when as women, and we're talking about women's leadership, also if you have women who who are transitioning, or trans women in your or LGBTQI women who are facing challenges, I think it's very important to be aware of all of these intersectionalities, and be do be affirmative about it, I think.
and I noticed Dr. Matthew also, in response to your compliment towards him, also responds that how being a mentor also means that sometimes it's easier to take all the credit, but to take a one-down position and allowing individuals to grow, helping them grow. Very beautifully put. Thank you, Dr. Matthew.
I also want to sort of acknowledge a few people here. I want to acknowledge Ashlesha, because I think like she's a fantastic leader, and she's so beautifully grown into that role, and all of you would agree. There's Rukshida here, who's another great champion. I know I want, Dr. Indumati, who's also showing so many leadership roles. I'm sure most of the people who've come here, many of them have worked with me, and I just want to acknowledge that everybody is, showing such marvelous leadership roles. I also want to sort of, on a parting note, acknowledge the one person who I think, showed me what a leader could be. And this is Dr. Sharda Menon, who in the last 1 year would call me every Tuesday. She had found out that Tuesday was my relatively free day. And she would call me up every Tuesday and say, Prabha, make sure that all maternity homes have a psychiatrist. And this would be her message every Tuesday to me in the last 1 year. It was almost as if she knew that her time was coming and she wanted to sort of push the agenda of maternal mental health. And she said, nobody's thinking about it. Ensure that every maternity home has a psychiatrist or mental health support. So I think, that's the kind of passion at 90 something that, really good leaders can have. And so thank you. I've learned a lot today from everybody, and thanks for the great discussants. I've got all your questions. I may not have answered all of them, but maybe we should do a workshop on this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the Green Oak and everyone. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, ma'am, for me to be a discussant. And I just also want to take this opportunity to formally thank Dr. Shlesha and Dr. Soumya, who have actually served as my mentors since I've passed out and helped me realize things about my career and have been supportive all this way. So yeah, thank you everyone for this opportunity and this discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Prabha. Thank you, Dr. Suhas, and thank you, Dr. Dharani. We're delighted, and it was a beautiful talk. It was a beautiful experience we've all had, even thinking to ourselves, those who've not actively written. I'm sure everybody has a lot of thoughts on their minds. Thank you so much to all the participants for such an engaging discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone. We had a lot of participants staying till the end, which rarely happens. So thank you. We hope to do this again soon.